Okay, so what we're going to be doing today is installing a GReddy Profec Boost Controller onto my SR swapped S chassis. Even though we are putting this onto a SR swapped S chassis, it should be pretty similar for like majority of turbo cars. And for those of you that don't know what a boost controller is or what it does, a quick like rundown is it just basically restricts the amount of flow going to your wastegate, in turn making your wastegate open later and building more boost or more PSI. So the kit I'm going with is the GReddy Profec Oled kit. And the reason I went with this kit is because I like the way that the controller looks and I like how small it is compared to like the old spec or option B one that's like a huge brick. And I also like that the map sensor could stay in the engine bay. But the main thing that drew me to this kit is the fact it has a 3-port Mac valve, which basically allows it won't open the wastegate until it builds up to the pressure it's supposed to be set at. Whereas like a normal like turbo car will start opening the wastegate slowly as it builds to peak boost. So now it'll just be like an on-off switch instead of like a dimmer light. So this is everything that's going to come with the GReddy Profec Oled kit. In theory, this should be everything you're going to need to install it. Like, you shouldn't have to buy anything extra. But if you do have something special, like you have a fuel pressure regulator that's a little too far or something, you might need more vacuum line, or if your wastegate's a little far, you might need more vacuum line. Other than that, everything should be here and we should be able to like finish this now. Okay, so I think the best way to install this is if you have like a good understanding of what each piece is and its purpose. I'm gonna start off with the controller. Basically, this is what you're gonna be looking at and what you're gonna be using to adjust how much boost pressure you're making. So it's important to put this like in a location that is nice to look at. This is your map sensor and also the module. Basically, this is gonna go somewhere in the engine bay and take vacuum from your fuel pressure regulator to know how much PSI or vacuum you're making. This is the harness and also another sub harness. This is your Mac valve. What this is gonna do is basically on this end where it says 1, is gonna take your wastegate pressure, delay it, and then put it out on the side that says 2. Where it says 3, you're not gonna mess with it even though it is threaded. This is basically just a vent or an exhaust port. Basically this is a 3-way Mac valve. What that does is it makes it like an on-off switch instead of like a dimmer switch. So basically once it hits, for example, if you set it to 8 psi, it'll just automatically send all the pressure through it rather than a traditional wastegate where as it's getting to 8 psi, it'll slowly start opening the wastegate. This is what you're going to use to mount the controller wherever you want. This bracket is used to mount the Mac valve in the engine bay as well. This is all your hardware and everything, including your T-fitting, your Mac valve, ports, and some hardware to mount it to the bracket. This is very important, so don't forget this. Basically, this is your filter, and it's very important to not forget it and also put it in the correct orientation. This is basically going to trap moisture from getting into your map sensor and destroying it. And then you have your vacuum lines. Okay, one thing I wanted to add that I forgot to mention earlier is even though this says 1, 2, and 3, the 3rd port is the exhaust port, so it is not going to be used to run a second wastegate on like a twin turbo car or something. What you actually want to do is on port 2, put a splitter or a T-fitting and run 2 lines, 1 to each wastegate rather than running it off 3, which is the exhaust port. Okay, so I think it's a good idea to plan out where you're gonna run everything rather than just like going in blindly and basically making it like a rat's nest because you didn't plan ahead. I decided that I'm putting my map sensor on the threaded hole on the strut tower right here by the fuel pressure regulator. The reason I'm doing that is so the vacuum line from the fuel pressure regulator to the map sensor is really short and tidy. And then on the other side of the engine bay, On the same matching port, I'm gonna be running the Mac valve. And the reason I'm running it over here is because the wastegate is right down here. And I think it's a good idea to keep it in line and nice and tidy. And then for the controller, I'm just gonna be running it on near my steering wheel since it's gonna be clear visibility and easy to adjust. So what I'm gonna be starting with is mounting up my map sensor and my Mac valve. To do that, I'm just gonna be popping off these little caps, which are tighter than that. Obviously, don't use a flathead if you care about your paint. This engine bay will be repainted in the future, so I don't really care. Okay. As you can see, when I took this little cap off, it exposed a threaded hole that I'm going to use to mount the map sensor. What I'm going to start off by doing is mounting my map sensor. But before I mount the map sensor, I want to run the vacuum line for it because it might be a little harder to get it on after the map sensor is mounted since the nipple for it will be on the bottom. Normally, if you have a stock fuel pressure regulator on your fuel rail, this is where you would get your source from, this gold thing. But since I have an aftermarket Tomei fuel pressure regulator, I have this really long vacuum line coming from here to here, so I don't have to fish for it. But if you have a stock one, it would just be from here. Or if you have another car, normally there's a vacuum port on your fuel pressure regulator, you would just tee into that. The kit comes with this T-fitting, and you'll notice that one side is like a 90-degree angle. The way you would do it is the straight shot will go from the fuel pressure or the fuel rail to the map sensor, and the right angled one will go to your fuel pressure regulator because you actually want a more clear reading for the map sensor. And yeah, I'm just gonna cut the line somewhere back here that you can't see it so it looks nice and tee into the map sensor. Alright, so what I'm gonna be doing right now is cutting my vacuum line that goes off the fuel rail to the fuel pressure regulator. I'm gonna be cutting it kinda towards the back of the manifold because I don't want the T-fitting to be really visible, but I do want it to be like easily accessible, so I'm not gonna be going like under the manifold or anything. Where I'm gonna be cutting it is probably right about there. That's not straight, hold up. There we go. So what I'm gonna be doing is teeing into this by going with the straight end in, just like that. And then the line that went to the fuel pressure regulator would now be going to the bottom, just like that. And now I'm gonna get the vacuum line, the skinnier one that came with the kit. So this is the vacuum line that came with the kit. It's the skinnier one. I'm gonna be putting it on the straight fitting right here. Just like that. Tucking this out of the way and running this up to the map sensor. So before bolting the map sensor, I'm going to be attaching the vacuum port to the nipple on the bottom because I feel like it's going to be hard to get to it once it's bolted down here. And I'm also going to be attaching this extension harness that will plug into this pigtail at the bottom of the map sensor and go through the back of the engine to the other side where the Mac valve will be. So yeah. And then this, just go there for now. We're not running it yet. Well, we're not running it nicely yet. Grab the vacuum port and now we can bolt this onto the threaded hole on the strut tower. So I almost forgot the filter. The squared part will go towards the map sensor, and then the part that's just like kind of blank will go to the fuel pressure regulator T-bracket adapter side. So I'm just going to be running this right about here. like that. Okay, so I just finished running the two harnesses from the right side of the car to the left side of the car. I ran it through the back of the motor over to here. This is the plug that will be plugging into the Mac valve right over here. And then this harness will be going inside the cabin of the car and will be powering the display. This plug is for the display, and this plug is for the positive and negative that you could just splice into the cigarette lighter or whatever you want to use as a source. So yeah, this needs to be ran into the car, and this needs to be plugged into the Mac valve, which we'll be setting up right now. Okay, so this is the Mac valve. We're gonna be setting this up to go into the car. What we're gonna be doing first is attaching these ports to number 1 and 2 on the Mac valve, like that. And then we're gonna be attaching it to the bracket supplied with the kit. The instructions say to use these isolators when you mount this in the car, one on the back and one in front of it, with the supplied bolt like that. And then this, or these long bolts with these little nuts is what's used to mount it to the bracket. So before bolting in the Mac valve, I actually want to run all the lines, like the one that goes from the manifold to the Mac valve and then the Mac valve to the wastegate. And one thing I already noticed is my line that goes from the manifold to the wastegate is like really short, and I don't think it will be able to reach the Mac valve, which is over here. But the vacuum line that's supplied in the kit seems to be like the perfect length to make it. So I'm going to be swapping out my original line for the one that's supplied in the kit, and then the one that's on the car right now that's a little bit shorter, I'm going to use for the other end of the Mac valve that will go to the wastegate. So I replaced the vacuum line that went from the manifold to the wastegate. Thankfully, the one that came in the kit was like the perfect length. Like, I didn't even cut it, and it came out to be the perfect length. And then the old vacuum line that originally went to the wastegate, I used as the other side. So it's still going from the wastegate to where the Mac valve is gonna be. And then I pulled off the rubber grommet over here that shows the threaded hole where I'm gonna put the Mac valve. So what I'm going to be doing right now is taking these two vacuum lines, the one that goes to the wastegate and the one from the manifold, and attaching the Mac valve in the middle of it, like this, and bolting it into this threaded hole using an isolator in front and behind the plastic retainer. So before plugging in the Mac valve to the harness that I ran from the right side of the car from the map sensor, I wanted to remind you guys that there is a clip on the Mac valve, and this attaches to the plastic bracket on the bottom to hold everything in place. So it goes like clip in and that. So I pretty much got everything done in the engine bay. The last step I had to do is run the harness that goes to the OLED display from the engine bay into the cabin. And to do that, I'm gonna try running it through the cable that controls the coolant hoses for the heat and cold air in the car. which is right over here. It's this grommet right by the head of the motor. I'm gonna try pulling the grommet out, splicing it, and running the harness through there just because I'm almost out of harness, as you guys can see, and I wanna make sure I have enough to tuck it how I want inside the car. I got the harness ran through the grommet into the cabin of the car. It ends up pretty much to the right of the throttle cable, but it's far enough that it won't interfere. Now I'm just gonna finish running this harness through the dash and bring it up next to the steering column right about here. The GReddy OLED kit comes with this bracket that you can use if you want to like mount it on something like this or like this, but I'm not gonna use this bracket because it'll make it come a little too high. I'm just gonna straight up double-sided tape the back of the controller onto the cluster surround, so it'll be like that. So for mounting the OLED controller, there's 2 ways to do it. You could flat mount it like I'm doing it by just putting double-sided tape here in the back, and there's these grooves if you want to mount it like that or like that, depending if you want the dial on the right side or the left side. Or you could do it the more traditional way and mount it onto this bracket by double-siding this area onto here and then double-siding this onto wherever you want to attach it. So if you were to mount it to the base, you would unscrew the 2 Allen keys on the side and double-side tape this to the back of the controller. But first you would tuck the wire like that so it's flush, and then run this, double-side this to the back and then run the wire through the middle and then screw it back on like that. Alright, so we cut it early yesterday because it was like 2 in the morning, and all we had to do today is just wire in the positive and the negative for the controller and we're done. But I just want to do like a quick walkthrough of what we did yesterday. So I'll go over here. I ran the MAC valve right here and it splices into the fuel pressure regulator hose right here with this T-fitting, goes into this filter and into the sensor itself. Then I have the 2 harnesses coming off of it going through the back of the motor to over there, where you will see the MAC valve with the wastegate feed going into it and the out going to the wastegate. The harness for this goes into the 1 sensor over here, and then the other half of the harness, the main one that goes to the controller, I spliced through this grommet right here into the cabin. And now we are left with this harness and this controller harness. So all we have to do now is just plug in the harness to the actual like controller, and then there's a sub harness that plugs in over here for a positive and negative. I'm gonna be getting my positive and negative for the from the cigarette lighter, and once that's done, we're pretty much done installing it, and all we have to do is set it up. So this is what I'm splicing into for my positive and negative wires. This is the plug for the cigarette lighter on an S chassis, but you could pretty much splice into like any cigarette lighter on any car. The black one on an S chassis is the ground, and the orange and striped one is the positive. So what I'm going to be doing is using these T-tap connectors that basically just tap into a wire and allow another one to plug into it, and it makes it really easy. Basically, it's just like this one or this one. one on the red, one on the black. So this is kind of hard to tell because I have like a billion things spliced into my cigarette lighter, but this orange tap right here that my pinky's touching, that's the positive, and then this black wire with the red tap that my pointer finger is touching, that's the negative. And now I just need to wire in terminals onto the positive and negative for the power supply harness, which is this one, and plug it in and everything should work. This wire honestly might be too skinny for this. Oh, it's staying. Harness is done. So this will go to the negative on the cigarette lighter, positive on the cigarette lighter. This will plug into the harness coming from the engine bay, and the other plug from the engine bay will plug into the display, and we're done. Then we just had to set it up. Plug it in. Okay, so we got the positive and negative, or the power harness. This is coming from the map sensor, and I ran it to the center console area. Just plug it in. And then this is the display that I'm plugging into the harness. Now before putting the interior all back together and basically risking something not working, I'm just gonna quickly put the key in and make sure it powers on. It should power on. Let's see. Oh, there it goes. So what I'm gonna do first is I'm just gonna drive it around and see what my boost is at right now, and see based on that what I want to set it to. One thing I want to note for you guys is I don't recommend installing a boost controller unless you have an aftermarket AFR gauge or AFR gauge in general, because you don't want to risk like running the car lean and doing damage. So yeah, I'm just gonna quickly put everything back together, drive it around, and then I'll get back to you when I start setting it up. Alright, so we just went on a drive to test out the boost controller, and I was hoping to set it, but from the drive I noticed that my car was like doing weird things, like some pulls. I set my limiter or my warning to 10 psi, and this is the stock SR turbo, so it should be hitting like 8 psi. And I set the boost controller to 0, but sometimes it was hitting the warning at 10 psi and other times it was hitting like only 4 psi. So I'm thinking that maybe my wastegate is bad, so I can't really set up the boost controller right now, but I do want to kind of show how to set it up. There are two, well technically 3 settings with this boost controller. There's low boost that you could set to whatever you want, high boost that you could set to whatever you want, and then off. I'm just gonna use low boost as an example. Oops, that switches it. So you can see I had the gain set to 0. The gain basically, well actually let's start with the main thing. The set. Basically the set is the percentage that you're blocking the wastegate, and the more you block the wastegate, the more boost you're gonna build. There's no like exact number to know how much PSI you're gonna make if you block a wastegate a certain amount. You just kind of have to experiment and see. But an example could be if you set the set to like 50 on an 8-pound wastegate, you might make like 12 pounds. The gain is basically how much more you're restricting the MAC valve or restricting the wastegate as you're going. So normally on like a turbo car, you'll hit your target boost, let's say it's 10 pounds, and then it'll start dropping to like 8 pounds and stabilize at 7. You could use your gain to basically keep it at 10. Then you can set your start boost, your peak, your warning. I set my warning to 14 on this last run, but I had it at 10 and it was hitting the warning every now and then. I was just like, I was confused because the set is set at 0, yet it was hitting the warning at 10. Then the limiter you could just keep at 0, or some people set it to 1. So hopefully I could sort out the wastegate issue and then make another video showing how to set up the boost controller properly, but for now, this is where I'm gonna leave it off. Hopefully this video was like useful and you guys liked it. If you did, please subscribe.